Hola, estudiantes. It's me, Mrs. Lackey. Can you see me down here? Hello. I am wishing you good wishes from home, that you're continuing your Spanish studies with diligence and trying to learn new things. And today's new thing that we're going to learn is using the present perfect. This is an exciting tense, and it combines with something that we've already been working on called past participles. So the first thing I want to do today is review the past participles that we used with Estar, and then understand how to start putting it all together. I'm going to first go over some regular and irregular past participles. Very key part of this. You'll remember them from the yellow cards we practiced with earlier this semester. Then we're going to review how to use those past participles to describe the results of actions using the very important verb estar. Once we're back up to speed on how to use that, we're going to learn how to use past participles with the present tense of a new helper verb called haber, and that's going to help us talk about what someone has or has not done. And finally, we're going to contrast the use and meaning of the present perfect with the use and meaning of the preterite. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want us to do is look at what we have done in the past using estar with past participles. So this is a worksheet that we got earlier this semester, and it says that we are going to use estar plus past participle to make some descriptions. The present tense of estar plus the past participle is used to describe the state of things, and it's used to describe the result of an action. For example, if somebody painted the walls, that's an action. What's the result of that action? That the walls are now painted. So we would say las paredes están pintadas. Or if a woman has been seated, the result is now the woman is seated. La mujer está sentada. And if somebody inspired you or something inspired you, the result would be you are inspired. So the question could be asked, tú estás inspirado. The imperfect tense of estar plus the past participle is used to describe a scene or to give background information in the past, and it also describes the result of an action. So instead of saying that the walls are painted, we could change it and say the walls were painted. The only thing that has to change in our sentence is that instead of using the present tense of estar, están, we're going to use the imperfect tense, estaban. Las paredes estaban pintadas. In this construction, estar is generally used in either the present or the imperfect tense. There are some exceptions, but we're really going to focus on estar in the present tense. Estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. Or in the imperfect, estaba, estabas, estaba, estábamos, estabais, estaban. Now notice that estar has accent marks on estás, está, estáis, and están. So don't forget to put in those accent marks, and of course also on estábamos in the imperfect. When we look a little bit more closely at this, we're seeing that basically what we're doing is taking a verb, like in la puerta está cerrada, the verb is cerrar, to close, but we're changing that verb into an adjective. Since the past participle here is being used as an adjective, the ending is also going to have to agree, like all adjectives, in gender and number with the noun that they're modifying. So, since we're talking about a puerta, a door being closed, since puerta is feminine and singular, instead of saying la puerta está cerrado, we're going to change it and say la puerta está cerrada. Los perros están perdidos. The dogs are lost. We took the verb perder, to lose, and we made it into an adjective, perdidos, to mean lost. Or nosotros estamos cansados. We are tired. Cansarse, the verb to get tired, has now become an adjective, cansado. It is plural because nosotros is more than one person. How do you form the past participle? It's actually very simple. The past participles follow the patterns below, and they change with the gender and the number of the noun that they refer to. So, just like we said, la puerta está cerrada, the cerrada becomes feminine with an A at the end, and los perros están perdidos, the perdidos becomes OS at the end to match with perros. But basically what you're doing is you're taking an AR verb like cerrar and adding ado to the end of it. Cerrar, cerrado. An ER verb like perder becomes perdido with IDO at the end, perdido. And an IR verb like vestir becomes vestido, or dressed, está vestido. He is dressed, él está vestido. Let's look at some of the regular verbs and their past participles and see some more examples. Comprar, to buy, in the past participle form would be comprado, because you're just adding ado to the end of it. Vender, to sell, becomes vendido, which would mean sold. The car is sold, or the car was sold. Vivir becomes vivido. Comer, comido. Empezar, empezado. You might have noticed that a stem changing verb like empezar does not need to stem change when you make it into the past participle. Pintar becomes pintado. Crear becomes creado, created. Influir is influido. Inspirar, inspirado. And destruir becomes destruido. It's not a lot of irregulars. There's not a lot of spelling changes that happened here. And like we said, there's no stem changes. So this is a pretty straightforward way of changing a verb into an adjective. The only thing you really have to worry about is making that adjective feminine or plural, depending on what it is describing. And again, these are verbs that we would use, verb forms that we would use with the verb estar. Of course, there are going to be irregulars, and these are the verbs that we really worked on and practiced with our yellow cards. Instead of just adding ado or ido to the end of these verbs, you have to memorize their past participle. So hopefully it's familiar to you that abrir becomes abierto, romper is roto, decir is dicho, resolver resuelto, escribir escrito. And we also have poner, which becomes puesto, hacer hecho, ver is visto, morir is muerto, and devolver is devuelto. So you're going to definitely have to do some work on going back to those, whether it's on Quizlet or making your own flashcards, and memorizing these special irregular past participles. There's also a few past participles that have accent marks on them. That's because we want to preserve the sound of the vowels, and in these stems, the stem actually ends in a vowel. It gets a little messed up when we have too many vowels in a row. So, for example, the verb leer, it becomes leído. If I don't put the accent mark on, the E and the I combine together to make something called a diphthong. The diphthong would be like the EI in the word 20, which means 20. And instead of leído, I would pronounce it ledo. But we don't want to hear ledo. We want to clearly hear the ending ido, because that past participle ending encodes meaning for us and helps us understand what the person's trying to say or write in Spanish. So instead of writing L-E-I-D-O, we write L-E-I with an accent mark, D-O, leído, for read. For example, the book is read. The same thing happens for caer, to fall. It becomes caído, for fallen. Creer is creído. Traer, traído. Oír, oído. Reír, reído. And sonreír becomes sonreído. One piece of good news is that there's a number of verbs that normally it would be irregular, but in the past participle, they're perfectly normal. They follow the rule of taking off the ER-IR and adding ido, or taking off the AR and adding ado. So ser is just sido, ir is ido, tener tenido, venir venido, estar estado, and poder podido. So that's pretty straightforward and easy to use. If you remember, for the quiz that we did over this section and some of the workbook pages that we did, we had things like, for example, La señora Paul escribió la prueba. Las pruebas están escritas. And we had to remember to put están and put escritas with an AN at the end of it. We also had some that we would put into the past, so it might say La secretaria plantó las flores, and we would say las flores estaban plantadas. They were planted. So we're describing the result of actions using a form of the verb estar, typically in the present tense or in the imperfect, along with a past participle. And very important, we make the endings of those past participles agree in number and gender with the noun that they are describing. We're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about our next grammar point, which is how to use past participles with the present tense of haber for a new verb form called the present perfect. So let me move my square so that you can see what I'm talking about. We are going to be using the present perfect to describe an event or action that has taken place in the past, but somehow it relates to the present moment. So things that just take place in the past, we would probably use the preterite for. This is a little different because these are things that started in the past, but they continue to be relevant to the present moment. Think, for example, of when you're doing a job interview. In a job interview, you don't just say, I did this, I did this, I did this. Instead, you're saying, well, I've taken charge of these things, and I've learned these things, and I've been able to put into action these things, and you're using what you have done to show that these are things that you've done in the past, but they are relevant to the job at hand that you're trying to get. Sometimes this happens with movies. When you're talking about what movies you have and have not seen, it might be because you're deciding right now in the present moment what movie you want to see. Or maybe you're talking about what movies would be a good choice for something to watch in class next week. So again, present perfect is used not just to talk about things that took place in the past, but things that took place in the past and are somehow relevant to the present moment. In English, we form the present perfect by combining the verb has or have with the past participle of the main verb. So our helper verb in English is has or have. That can be confusing because in Spanish, the helper verb is not the verb tener, which means has or have. We have our own special helper verb, which is the verb haber. You might have seen haber before. It is actually the verb that I comes from, H-A-Y, which means there is or there are. We're just using it in a different way, and we're going to conjugate it in the present tense to talk about what we have and have not done. So the English example here, we have repaired everything, in Spanish would be hemos arreglado todo. We've taken hemos from the present tense of the verb haber, our helper verb, and our main verb to repair, arreglar, is used in the present participle. Arreglado. Hemos arreglado todo. I'm sorry, that's the past participle. Hemos arreglado todo. So let's look a little bit more in depth at how these examples work out. To talk about events that have already happened or not happened, we're going to use the present perfect tense. Here's how. Conjugate the verb haber in the present tense, and then they add the past participle of the main verb. Together, those two pieces become the present perfect. The present perfect is something called a compound tense. Compound tenses means that there's two parts. You don't have just one verb. You have two verbs that work together to express what you're trying to communicate. So we have the helper verb haber with the main verb in the past participle. So first, we're going to use has, hemos, habéis, or han as our helper verb. Those are the present tense conjugations of the verb haber. Please note that the H is always silent. Has, hemos, habéis, han. There's no H sound there whatsoever. The past participle typically will end in ado or ido, but we're going to have the exact same irregulars that we looked at when we did this with Estar. So abierto, devuelto, muerto, all those same irregulars are going to come into play here. Here's an example. Ella ya ha ido de tapas. She has already gone out to eat tapas. Or Rosa nunca ha robado nada. She has never stolen anything. Nunca ha robado. Never has stolen. When you use an object or a reflexive pronoun with the present perfect, you're going to put those before the conjugated verb haber. A really common use of this would be like a reflexive verb. So if you're using the reflexive verb afeitarse, to shave yourself, if you want to say Alberto no le ha afeitado, the le would go before the se would go before a. No se ha afeitado. He has not shaved himself. Or in this example, Alberto te ha comprado el billete. It's a question. It's asking, has Alberto bought you the ticket? Has he bought you the ticket? Or sí, me lo ha comprado. He has bought it for me. The me and the lo or any of those other kinds of little pronouns are always going to go before. Here's really the simple way to remember this. Because of this being a compound tense, where two different verbs are working together to express one thing, those two verb forms cannot be broken apart. You will never have anything go between the form of the verb haber